From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Burke, and in every Blue Sky episode, we'll be speaking to leaders, researchers, and thinkers whose stories and insights will remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. Welcome to a special episode of Blue Sky, where we will be focusing on the subject of gratitude. My guest today will be, well, me, and we'll also be hearing segments from several Blue Sky alums. As we approach Thanksgiving holiday this year on the heels of a disruptive and for some disheartening election season, I thought this might be a good time to dive more deeply into the subject of gratitude and appreciate the close connection between optimism and an attitude of appreciation and thankfulness. I hope you enjoy this Blue Sky episode as much as I enjoyed putting it together. So thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the subject of gratitude. And let's start with Thanksgiving. A lot of people are going to gather around a table, and many families and friends who get together will start by saying grace. Now, we often hear the word grace used in other contexts, like they have style, they have grace. But do you know where that word comes from in this context? I had a hunch and I looked it up. It actually comes from the Latin word gratia, which means goodwill or gift, or can also be an expression of gratitude. So that's where the word gracias comes from in Spanish, grazie in Italian. And so when you say grace, you are expressing a form of thanks or gratitude. So I'm kicking things off with a fun fact. So let's continue on with the Latin Roman Empire theme and quote the late great Cicero. It was Cicero who said, "Gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues, but the parent of all the others." We like that quote a lot, and we think that if you can be grateful for the things you have, the experiences you've had, the people around you, your friends, your family, that sets you up to be more optimistic about the future. And once again, referring back to the election, think about those things that you're grateful for that will not change based on the outcome of this or any other election. Again, your friends, your family, but your pets, your hobbies, the outdoors, the people you work with. Be grateful for those things, and it sets you up to be more optimistic about how things could be down the road. And on optimism, I've said before that optimism in some ways is kind of ironic, but in some ways, it's almost a selfish position to take. It's good for you to be optimistic. Optimists live longer. They have better health statistics, lower blood pressure, that sort of thing. And likewise, gratitude has the same benefits. One of my favorite guests was a man named Dr. Richie Davidson from the University of Wisconsin. He's a neuroscientist, and he talks a lot about neuroplasticity. And he has this great thought about things we might do before we eat a meal, getting back to the idea of grace. Let's have a listen to Richie Davidson and hear what he had to say on this subject.
One of the things that we can do before we eat is do a little appreciation practice, because it is, I think, safe to say that for virtually everyone on the planet, when they have a meal, it's dependent on many other people. It may be farmers. It may be people who deliver food in a truck. It may be people who work in a local grocery store. Could well be all of those people. There are many, many people whose work was required in order to bring food onto one's plate. And so just cultivating a sense of appreciation is something that really can be an elixir for the soul, because first of all, appreciation is a readily available quality that really is so important for our well-being. The second is that it immediately, instantaneously helps us appreciate our interdependence. The fact that we're not alone as isolated islands, but rather our lives are so deeply interconnected and embedded with one another. And that we know that humans are social animals. this is really something that is important to recognize and a source of well-being.
As usual, there's a lot to like about what Richie Davidson has to say there. One of the things I picked out listening to this section again was how he says that appreciation is always readily available. I think it's important to think about that. These are things that we don't have to look around for. We don't have to read about. We don't have to wait for a stroke of inspiration or a muse. It's readily available. If we want to turn on our gratitude, we can do it. And I really like this simple exercise of not just saying grace over a meal necessarily, but actually thinking about where your food came from, who was responsible for it. So simple act, but a great one to think about as we try to cultivate more gratitude in our lives as a springboard towards optimism. One of my favorite guests, who I quote all the time, is Kevin Kelly. And among the many good things he had to talk about, he also had a few words to say about the subject of gratitude. You introduced a word I'd never heard before. You said embrace pronoia, which is the opposite of paranoia. Choose to believe that the entire universe is conspiring behind your back to make you a success. Where'd that come from?
Well, that was actually coined by a guy whose name I've forgotten about 20 years ago, and he wrote a book called Pronoia. And paranoia, as you know, is this belief that the world is conspiring to take you down, to hurt you. And that flip is, again, in line with the basic idea of gratitude and generosity, which I think is really at the fundamental paradox of the world. So the fundamental paradox of our existence right here is that the more you give, the more you get. That generosity is the way to receive, and that the foundational thing, gratitude, is the only prayer. I mean, it's just like this idea of giving, and sharing, and being generous and being abundant is paradoxically the way to be selfish.
As usual with Kevin Kelly, there's a lot to think about there. I'd never heard gratitude is the only prayer. It's a beautiful expression. And again, he is reinforcing this idea that he calls it a paradox, that doing these things for other people, being grateful, being generous, is actually a selfish act. It's all good for us. So appreciate that. As for Pronoia, it is a book, and it was written by a gentleman named Rob Bresny. Brezsny is how it's spelled. Spelled very carefully if you're looking for this book. Full disclosure, I've not read it. My pledge to you is I won't pretend to have read a book if I haven't. But obviously made an impact on Kevin, so it may be worth your while. So getting back to past episodes and the thoughts around gratitude that some of my guests have had. One of my earliest interviews was with a gentleman named Bert Jacobs. He's the co-founder of Life is Good, a company whose entire reason for being is to promote optimism. Let's hear what Bert had to say way back when on the subject of gratitude.
We didn't have gratitude really on our radar. We hadn't really identified it. And as we started growing this Life is Good community, the people who wrote us the most interesting and compelling letters were not the people on Easy Street. They were people who were going through really difficult things. They were going through chemotherapy. They were rehabbing after being in car accidents. They had a child who's autistic. They, all these difficult things. But we noticed something in those letters that people always took the time to point out what they're grateful for and the blessings in their lives. And, we would have had to have been dummies not to recognize it. It was so obvious because you get these letters and you start circling things and underlining things and saying, hey, what's the common thread? Because we're trying to understand our customer. Who's our customer? And there are people that face really difficult things. So we decided to start honoring those people and making T-shirts about gratitude. And sure enough, those T-shirts sold really well and connected really well with the Life is Good community. So there is a connection. And, as we look back on it now, I think the idea is that if you choose to be what we call a rational optimist, that somebody that recognizes there's difficulties in the world, but overcomes them by focusing on the opportunities.
It's great to listen back to Bert Jacobs, thinking about letters they received at Life is Good and finding this common thread throughout them of gratitude, and gratitude being expressed by people in very difficult circumstances. If you've listened to other Blue Sky episodes, you'll know that many of our guests have come from really tough circumstances, have dealt with some of the toughest challenges that one can face, but they somehow manage to be optimistic, and a lot of times that's grounded in a fundamental sense of gratitude. So it's reinforcing to hear someone like Bert, whose entire business was built on promoting optimism, talking about finding this thread of gratitude and even going on to make shirts and apparel that espouse the value of gratitude. So now we're going to talk some more about this issue of what we can be thankful for, and we're going to make a slight pivot and focus a little bit on reasons to be grateful for this country, for the United States of America, despite our many imperfections. So turning now to reasons to be grateful for this country, for the United States of America. One of my favorite episodes, we brought it back as an encore presentation, is with Ayn Vu Sawyer. Her story is absolutely remarkable. Hers was one of those families that we saw a film of being pushed into helicopters fleeing Saigon at the end of the Vietnam War. And she made it to this country, and she has been a grateful citizen of this country ever since. And I've said before that immigrants are the ultimate optimists, and in many ways, Ayn is the ultimate immigrant. Incredible story. But let's pick it up with some things she had to say about the country and why she appreciates America as much as she does. If I read it right, a lot of your generosity, I think, springs from what you also have, which is an incredible sense of gratitude and about all kinds of things in life, and also about this country that you're now in. And I have a quote that I read of yours that I really appreciated, which was, you said, America spoils me with freedom, because even when I was in Vietnam, I always hungered for freedom. You see, America gave me the freedom to be who I am, and also gave me the resources so that I can get what I want. Also, American people gave me an amazing example of giving themselves to others. One of the reasons I like that quote, Ayn, is that I think that many of us who were born and raised in this country take so much of what you say there for granted. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think we forgot that two things. Freedom is one of the most honorable things that make us that of our own humanity. Without freedom, what are we? Really, who can we be without our freedom of expression, freedom to love, freedom to read and write, but most importantly, freedom to help others. This is the second part that I want to share with you. So freedom is important, but the freedom to help others, the ability to help others is truly a luxury, a blessing. We are so damn lucky to be able to help others. Many people in the whole entire world wanted to help others, but they can't. They don't have the resources.
Amazing.
They life's so hard for them. It's like a zero-sum situation. The pie too small for them to even help. And so there's two things that American people, and I'm sure other people do too, but I want to talk about America because I benefit so much from this country and her people. So I would say the ability to help other people is a luxury.
Pretty striking to hear Ayn Vu Sawyer describe the ability to help others as a luxury. Of course, if we ask most people to list luxuries, that would not be on the list. It's more like big cars, big homes, jewelry, that sort of thing. But she describes helping others as a luxury and the opportunity to do that. And she thinks about this country as a fortunate place because we are so well off compared to the rest of the world that we actually have this luxury, where in other places people are more likely to be just struggling to get by. And there's plenty of those folks here in the United States. But More than any other country, so many of us have this luxury of being able to help others. Really great mindset to take into the Thanksgiving holiday. And here's another person who appreciates this country. Unlike Ayn Vu Sawyer, he was born here. And his name's Ted Johnson, and he talked about reasons he loves this country so much. Let's take a listen to that. So one of the blurbs on your first book I really liked, it's from Mitch Landrieu, and he said, in this work, that's you, Ted, he challenges America to find her better self precisely because he loves her so much. Why do you love America so much?
Yeah, it's like asking, why do you love your family so much? It's like, this is where I was born. It is the world I was born into. And fortunately, I was born into a time in the nation far better than it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago. If I was born in 1875 instead of 1975, or 1775 instead of 1975, very different existence simply because of the color of my skin. And so I love the country so much because of its sort of promise, its belief in democracy and equality. I love it because others have fought so hard for me to have a place in it, and for those who will come after. And because it's sort of cliche to say, but it is a place that was founded on an idea, even when that idea was not executed to perfection and may never be to perfection. But the idea of equality and of democracy, and that people should basically reap the rewards of the work they put in, I buy into all of that. So America is home. I love it because it's mine, and it's not even a question for me. It's always a question of how do we make it better, not how do we get rid of it, or how do we do it, change it completely.
As so many people worry about the path that this country is on, it's helpful, I think, to hear Ted Johnson's words and remind ourselves that this country is not and never was perfect, but that we were founded on ideals and ideas that are worth believing in and striving towards. Of course, we all know one of the challenges we have between us and being more grateful and optimistic is a steady stream of negativity that we get from the news media. I've been lucky to have on Blue Sky several guests who are tackling this issue. One of my very first episodes featured Angus Hervey, from what was then called Future Crunch. He's since changed the name to Fix the News, and he is making it his life's work now to talk about good news that is underreported, to basically fix the news ecosystem by including good news that we should know about and that would make us feel better. David Bornstein of Solutions Journalism has started a large organization that's actually helping traditional media outlets report more on stories that offer solutions to many of our vexing problems. The David Bornstein episode of Blue Sky is one you might want to check out if you haven't already. And another one of our favorites, Chris Anderson. For many years, he's the curator of the TED organization, as in TED Talks. And he wrote a great book called Infectious Generosity. I'd like to play a little bit from my interview on Blue Sky with Chris Anderson.
So what makes a huge difference is if you take a moment each day to think about the many things you could be grateful for, it changes. Humans are wired to respond to generosity with generosity. Gratitude is essentially an act of paying attention to the generosity we have received, just by the fact that we're alive. Generosity from the universe, or however you want to frame it. But it's amazing that we're alive. We're a 1 in a countless trillions chance of lottery. Like the very fact that you open your eyes and you see this amazing world out there with all of its richness and that it's different today than it will actually be any other day is incredible. The fact that there are people who can tolerate us and love us is amazing. Could be grateful for that. The fact that the internet is here, I think it's amazing. I think this is a great time to be alive. The fact that you can turn on a tap and have a glass of drinking water on demand anytime. Almost no one in history has had that. And so there's all these things that you can pay attention to and get delight from.
Those are some pretty powerful and persuasive words from Chris Anderson. And in terms of infectious generosity, he is now trying to use the internet, which he praises here. He said at one point that he's been very disillusioned by so much of what we've done with the internet, but still sees great promise. And so he's encouraging all of us, instead of making negative things go viral, trying to spread infectious generosity, repost, tell stories about people being generous and doing good in the world. And we can, as he says, reclaim the internet. Another person who spoke about gratitude on our podcast, Blue Sky, was our very first guest, David Gardner. And he co-founded with his brother, The Motley Fool. He believes a great deal in optimism, and gratitude is a big part of what drives him. And you can hear here some of his thoughts on the subject from our very first episode of Blue Sky.
Well, I do think that there's already a lot of good literature out there, and I'm not even somebody who's read all the gratitude books, but they're certainly out there. But I think, well, people who go through their days feeling gratitude, studies will show, are A, both happier than if they don't, and even better, B, they make others happier. It's contagious. So I think this is really important. It's like optimism, frankly. I think obviously some people are not going to catch the contagion of our optimism today, Bill. Some people just aren't wired that way, or they're in a place in their life that's hard. And this sounds too happy-go-lucky. And I totally can appreciate if somebody's reacting to Blue Sky with me that way this time. But I really want to make sure we dial it back out and look at the bigger picture. A readiness to show appreciation for and to return kindness, which is basically another way of thinking about gratitude, a readiness to show appreciation, to call it out, rather than say, hey, who's not doing something right? Or what if things go bad? What if we instead say, hey, I just caught you doing something right? What if things actually work? Those kinds of open-ended questions lead to openness, creativity, usually better performance, and certainly, I think, contagion in a really good way.
I love hearing the enthusiasm in David Gardner's voice when he talks on this subject of gratitude and optimism and how they can be contagious. I also really appreciate when he says, how could things go right? What if I catch you doing something right, doing something good? That's also the hallmark of another business leader we've had on the podcast, David Novak. David Novak ran Yum Brands, the largest restaurant company in the world. He also was the founder of, the creator of Cool Ranch Doritos. If you do nothing else in your career but oversee the launch of Cool Ranch Doritos, that's a lot in my book. But he's done so much more. He's got his own podcast called How Leaders Lead, a whole organization that gives free lessons on leadership. He's also written several books. His most recent is How Leaders Learn. He's a really special person. He was one of our earliest Blue Sky episodes, and he really built his entire career. His driving ethos is about showing appreciation in the workplace and how that can drive performance. So let's listen to a little bit about what he had to say about that in our Blue Sky conversation.
People need to be appreciated for what they do. And then I've had many, many experiences throughout my business career that showed me the importance of that and the value of that. So, I've always believed in the importance of showing appreciation to people who are getting jobs done. People leave careers or change jobs for two reasons. Number one, they don't get along with their boss. And number two, they don't feel appreciated for what they do. And, I think both of those are kind of tied together, And, so I have always tried to create an environment of appreciation and recognition. And in fact, one of the concepts that I really teach and talk about in leadership is what I call purposeful recognition. What are the behaviors that will drive performance in your business? Identify what those behaviors are, and then recognize the heck out of them whenever you see them. And guess what will happen? You'll have more people do those behaviors because they know that's what you value. And it's a very common sense kind of approach, but man, it really does work. And one of the things about common sense is it's not that common. People don't do it, and,
Exactly.
But I think recognition is one of those things that makes a lot of sense. And if you do it, I think it's your secret weapon in leadership.
So we've heard about gratitude being good for you personally, being good for the world, spreading generosity, creating optimism. Now we're hearing from David Novak that it can even be a secret weapon in the workplace, showing appreciation, showing gratitude for the hard work of the people around you, recognizing those behaviors that you want to reward can have a huge impact. So gratitude in the workplace is a huge thing. David tells a story in our conversation about one of the things he did was when he was running KFC, he would give out rubber chickens in recognition of jobs well done. And he was touched one time. He actually went to the funeral of one of the people who'd been a recipient of this recognition. And it was an open casket. And as he walked by, in the casket with this gentleman was the rubber chicken that he received from David Novak as a sign of appreciation. Another area we've talked a lot about on various Blue Sky episodes is healthcare and all the incredible advances going on there, all the many reasons we have to be grateful for these new breakthroughs, to be optimistic about the future, the length of our lives, the quality of our lives. Dr. Robert Soifer comes to mind. He's an oncologist at Dana-Farber, who in the Blue Sky episode with me, he talked about all the incredible changes that have gone on just in the last several years, and certainly in the nearly 38 years that he's been practicing medicine. We talked to Jamie Metzel, who's written Superconvergence, which talks about all kinds of advancements going on around the world, but particularly a lot about healthcare. He talked about the miracle of the COVID vaccines and that they worked as well as they did, that they were developed so quickly, got us out of lockdown so quickly. And we talked to my friend, John Daniel, who had a full heart transplant. The gratitude he feels around that and the normal life, the very normal life and active life he's been able to live and lead since getting that transplant. He's now the founder of Bluff City Pickleball. We've also had many episodes of Blue Sky with guests who are experiencing significant health challenges or have faced them in the past. One of our favorites was with Marco Cicero. He is a world record holder in the marathon for Paralympians. He was in an accident in Anchorage, Alaska. He passed out in the woods and needed to have his legs amputated because of frostbite. So he's lying in bed. He's in college on a track scholarship, and he's lost his legs. Well, he has a turning point on that bed where he thought, I can either give up or I can make something of this. And that's exactly what he's done. He's inspiring people all over the world to battle their own infirmities and to continue to strive and achieve. And he's done that through marathon. An episode we've yet to release is coming out very soon with a woman named Olivia Clark, who's had a terrible bout with cancer more than once. And from this despair, she started something called Humor Beats Cancer. And she said to me in the interview something I will not forget. She said, you just have to tell yourself some days this disease might kill me, but I'm still alive today. That's how she finds gratitude every day to do her work. And then the one and only episode I've done with a relative of mine, Christine Minka-Miller, who is my first cousin once removed. She has faced her own debilitating illness with an incredible sense of resilience and gratitude. And let's listen to what she's had to say on this subject.
When those first few weeks, I said I was, had my bridal shower, all these things that should have been great, but instead were just depressing and hard. And I had a friend reach out and she said, you need to start writing all the God winks down. And I hadn't really heard that phrase before. I've heard it a lot since then, but just the moments where you see God showing up for you or doing something that was just like this little moment of like, hey, I see you, Christina, you're not alone in this. And so I would also say, if you're not a Christian, gratitude, like that's what that is, right? It's being grateful for the moments that are good in the middle of the really hard. And I have a list that I wrote out, and I did it actually one day in particular. I just was feeling really, really awful. And that was when she texted me that. I sat down and I think I wrote like 35 God winks out. And that by the end, the thing that set me onto this depression was the thing I was feeling grateful for. Like it just really flipped my perspective by the end of the list. And so that is something I still do every single morning. I wake up and I write one thing I'm grateful for. Sometimes it's, a cup of coffee. And sometimes I'll write like a long paragraph about a really cool thing that just happened. And other days I write, I'm not feeling that grateful today, but the sun is out and that's cool. and I think it's just that that habit of I will choose to be grateful anyway. And for me, that's sort of this like rebellion against my reality that this is hard, but I am going to fight against that because we have to. We actually have to actively choose to not fall into the hole that you're being forced into.
I love the way Christina talks about her gratitude practice, and she says it's like a rebellion against my reality. That is a strong person, a very special person. And speaking of people, let's shift to people and being grateful for the people in our lives who have helped us in so many ways. There are references to that earlier in this episode. I wanted to point out a couple that are very specific. In past conversations we've had, Melissa Connolly, who founded One Goal. This is an organization that helps promising high school students get through high school and into and through college. And she said she got involved with this because she wanted to duplicate the efforts of Mrs. Jeter. Mrs. Jeter was her high school counselor way back when she was falling through the cracks. Mrs. Jeter stepped in and really guided her and became almost like a mentor and almost like a second mother to her. And she is so grateful for the work of Mrs. Jeter that it now fuels the work that she does today. Another great story of mentorship and guidance is in the episodes we did with Jonathan Conyers and his mentor, Deco. So let's listen a little bit to what Jonathan Conyers had to say about that and his relationship with Deco.
I salute a lot of my Black friends and family. They like, Jonathan, you work so hard. We don't want to hear no white savior stories. And I'm like, I can't think about what the world thinks. I can't think about a journalist spinning a story the way they want to spin it. I can't think about that. But I will be damned if I don't highlight these amazing people, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of the pronoun, regardless of their gender, regardless of where they come from, their zip code, or what advantages or disadvantages they had in their life. I will share stories about the amazing people who helped me. And that's what this story is about. So, I hope it was obvious throughout it that as much as he was a part of my village and as much as I needed him, I learned later throughout my life he needed me also.
When Jonathan Conyers is talking about telling his story, he's referring to his magnificent memoir, I Wasn't Supposed to Be Here, which I highly recommend. And he refers to pronouns there. Deco, who was his high school debate coach, is transgender. And that caused quite a bit of controversy when he transitioned in high school. But Jonathan's stuck with him and they've stuck with each other. And you hear there about the huge influence they've had on each other's lives. At one point, Deco was thinking about going back to law school. And he had this epiphany at seeing Jonathan's success and realizing that he could really influence the world more as a teacher and mentor and now founder of the Brooklyn Debate League than he ever could in the field of law. So it's a beautiful story. Also, speaking about appreciation for people, I had a really fun interview with Billy Starr. Billy Starr founded the Pan Mass Challenge. He did that in response to losing his mother and some friends to cancer, relatives to cancer, and he has started the most successful athletic fundraiser in the world, the Pan Mass Challenge. I've been lucky enough to ride in it more than once, and here he talks about one of the things that makes this race and this ride so special, and it has to do with gratitude.
I'm fond of a certain quote that goes back at least 10 years from a letter I received. And a woman who had done both the Boston Marathon and now the Pan Mass Challenge. And her comment was, and I quote, "They're both wonderful events. But the critical difference is that in the Boston Marathon, people line the road and they say, 'You can do it.' But in the PMC, people line the road and they go, 'Thank you for riding.' And that's all the difference in the world." End quote. Very powerful.
Yes, gratitude can be very powerful. And I hope you've taken some lessons about gratitude from this episode and the many incredible guests we've had here on Blue Sky. One guest I would have loved to have had on Blue Sky is Henry David Thoreau, but alas, he died more than 160 years ago. He died, by the way, at the age of around 45, which was about average for the middle of the 18th century. He died in the 19th century. And he once said, "I am grateful for what I am and have. My Thanksgiving is perpetual." And as we approach our annual Thanksgiving ritual here in the United States, let's think about making gratitude and Thanksgiving perpetual in the way that Henry David Thoreau did, someone who lived in much more difficult times, frankly, than the ones we find ourselves in today. And now, as we come to the end of this episode and the final days of Gratitude Month at the Optimism Institute, I want to express my thanks, my gratitude to all of you, the listeners of the Blue Sky podcast, those of you who follow the Optimism Institute on social media and elsewhere. We couldn't do it without you, and we're going on about 2 years of this work now. And it is these expressions of thanks and gratitude and encouragement that I receive that really keep me going through this work. And so I thank you for that. I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving. Keep listening to the Blue Sky podcast. We'll be back with a new episode next week. And thanks for listening here. And thanks to all my amazing guests on Blue Sky, those that we featured in this episode and all the many others who've been on in the past. We also have some great guests in the pipeline, so keep on listening, and we'll be back with a brand new episode next week. Thanks again. I hope you enjoyed this special episode of Blue Sky on gratitude. Please tell us what you thought by leaving us a rating or review. And to be sure you don't miss any future episodes, subscribe to Blue Sky wherever you get your podcasts, including on YouTube. All graphic design and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute are provided by Crush Graphics. That's Crush with a K. If you'd like to check out more of their fantastic work at crushgraphics.com. And all of our Blue Sky episodes are made possible by the incredible editing and mixing done by the team at Sound On Studios. You can learn more about their work at soundonstudios.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.